Welcome to Las Doctoras podcast, featuring your favorite profas bringing women and gender studies topics out of the university and onto the kitchen table.
I'm Cristina, Chicana, Pinay, queer, Sha, ella, traveler, Earth, Mama Bruja.
I'm Renee, Mexicana, Tejana, Chicana, she, her, ella, Mama Bruja scholar and scribe.
Together, we are the academic and word brujas creating revolutionary spaces outside the walls of the ivory tower to cast spells, read the ancient texts, and tell our sacred stories. We make this magic as an offering to our ancestors, to those who will come after us, and for the change we wish to see in the world. Salud!
Hi, we're here. Episode 59.
Oh gosh, that's great.
Yeah, for sure it's episode 59.
Wow. Does that mean we start with 60 for the new
season?
Dang.
Yeah.
That feels good.
I think that by the time this airs too, we'll have already made the announcement.
It's like Doña status for like episodes.
I guess.
Something like
I
that.
love Doña status. No, Señora, right?
Yeah, Señora status.
Yeah, so I think this is going to come out August, September sometime, and
we'll be in a holiday.
Definitely, and prepping for fall.
Yeah.
And we'll have already announced my new podcast.
Yes, it's very exciting. Do you want to mention it here?
Yeah, I think so, because I think by the time it comes out,
let's do like a catch up. Let's do this.
Yeah. Okay, so
we
end of the school year.
Yes, the end of the school year. This is my first kind of end of the school year, I want to say, because I have a first grader. Before this, everything was different. You got this down somehow.
I've had many.
I am impressed
end of the school years.
Because there's all these end of the school year things. There's a whole energy of the last week that I've forgotten about.
Yeah, totally.
And then there is like all the feelings that our children
have.
Yeah,
I know that last week was pretty rough.
The school semester ends. Yeah.
I think they were anxious, anticipating like, let's just get to the summer already. Like,
right. But then they're like, it's like bittersweet because they don't want to say goodbye. There's just so many mixed emotions. But we survived end of the school year.
Yeah, end of the school year. And then I think we took like a really nice week off. Like you and I didn't even, we were still texting, and
it wasn't like deliberate. I think normally we kind of plan those things. And this time we were both just like,
we just needed time.
I see you over there.
Yeah. We were like, we were just tired. But now we're getting back into the swing of things. I'm like, what else can we catch up on?
Oh, well, we're in the middle of our, sanctuary, our Las Doctoras sanctuary, and our writing workshops within that, and that feels.
So if you haven't already signed up, you can.
There's still time. It's a rolling sign up,
/sanctuary, and you can join for $20 a month.
Yeah.
And you get access to seasonal workshops, our workshop archive. Oh, I think we're also going to be announcing very soon. That's what we got to work on, by the way. The logistics.
Yes.
We're trying to host an in-person event.
Oh, we do. We do have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're really hoping that that's going to work out.
With some fun Thor prizes. No, I wouldn't consider those. Some
merch.
Sacred merchandise coming your way.
Sacred merchandise. I love that. So we've got some things in store. I'm also starting a new podcast.
Yes, just celebrating that for you.
I'm excited for that. It's a feminist pop culture podcast. Doing all the things I love, being a feminist and talking about pop culture.
Totally, yes.
Bringing all those things together. So, so I'm excited about that.
This is what you got your degree in. This is who you, this is this is your whimsy. This is like your joy, and I love.
And I'm really trying to, I think you and I have been trying to do that too. And I think this is an extension of that, is really just doing things from a place of joy. I think sometimes when we like even our podcast, we started it totally from a place of joy, and then I think over the seasons it's been kind of like or different facets of our business have become work. And certain things, like even the podcast, right, we still have to do so many behind the scenes logistics, with the podcast, and so there is some sense of like work and labor to it, and so it can sometimes take away the joy. And so we really are trying to make be intentional about leaning into the joy a lot more.
Pause, consider, like, is the exchange of energy, is it coming back in a way that's very fulfilling? And so I mean, I think that's why we continue to do the podcast, because it does do that, but there is still like a pause of how can it be done from that place.
And I think and separating from any kind of like outcome too, right? I think we've really learned our lesson with that, and I think that's what I want to do with this podcast, is really just say like, I think last summer, right, I had a really tough summer mentally, right, mental health wise, and I feel much better, but I'm like, and I'm also gonna be 41 soon, and maybe a little bit of a midlife crisis. Like, what do I do? Well, you know what? It was also born out of being rejected from job after job after job, and it's been really frustrating. And so I'm like, when people talk about, oh, God or the universe, has other plans for you, and I'm like, okay, well, what the fuck are those plans? Can you clue me in? And so I'm really just trying to follow.
That's like a nonviolent communication moment there. You're like, well, give me the money then,
right. And it's like, how do we? So I'm trying to just follow my intuition and say like, okay, what is it that brings me joy? And so I'm really trying to do this podcast from that place of joy, right? Like, because immediately I was like, oh my God, and I got to do this and I got to do this, and I'm like, oh, let me just slow down and let me just allow me to just be me and do that,
Well, I just want to share, pop culture is something that I tend to try to like stay away from, I mean, I had a whole time in high school where I missed at Tupac, and I didn't know who, like I just totally like from, I don't know, 96 to 2002, whatever. I just didn't watch or listen to anything. And I have those monkish or whatever. They're very Virgo, aren't they? They're like something like, who says this? And at the same time, it's been our relationship and your wisdom, your dissertation, this critical media lens that I think has empowered me to step in and just take what I want. And leave the rest, but I appreciate all the dialogue. I appreciate it too, particularly in raising children who I know so much media is in their world and coming to them. So I can just say I'm so much celebrating you doing this podcast and giving other people these tools that I think that you have enabled, and passed on to me.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That is what my dissertation was about. And I think it's like, I don't know, like I think, that critical media literacy. I think because I remember watching 90210, right? And I was pretty young when 90210 was out.
You must have been.
Yeah, and I remember my mom, like we were watching it, and she would be
not
like,
the college years.
No, it was like early 90210.
I read the books. Oh God.
And I remember her being very cognizant of like what I would watch, and she would watch it with me, and always like having a conversation and be like, that's not real, or that's not, like, she was a filter for me, I think.
Go Lupe.
When I would watch things, and I think it helped me have a healthy relationship with pop culture where I didn't buy into certain things. I was able to kind of be like, okay, that's that, and this is me. And not to say that it didn't have any impact on me, because that's obviously, but I think that there was also a time when my love of pop culture was always positioned as this like silly, frivolous thing, right? Like, like when I was a journalism undergrad and they asked me, I talked about this in introductory episode, but like they would say, oh, well, what kind of journalism are you going to get into? And I was like, oh, like fashion and entertainment. And it was always like, oh, like not news and not politics, which ironically now, right? Like that is my life is, you know, news and politics.
I don't think that's ironic. I mean, I think that's heavy, like people, you know, giving you a sense of where the power is at, you know, and you did it to survive, and now you are reclaiming some things and you love from a place of like.
And even in my grad school, I did write about like media and pop culture, and there was always this like, well, what is, you know, because other people were writing about like prison industrial complex. You know, I was in an ethnic studies department, so we're talking about like very serious, heavy things, and I'm like, and I'm going to talk about, you know, TV and film, and it just, I always felt like I was just talking about something so silly. And I think I always argued that, and many scholars before me, right? I wasn't the first scholar to argue
neocolonialism,
many scholars will argue that pop culture is actually really important for us to look at and to understand its impact on us, because if we're going to talk about social justice and talk about like pushing back against systems, you know, media is the main method of communication to perpetuate like all these systems of oppression. And so anyway, I mean, I don't need to read you my introduction to my dissertation.
I'm just also thinking like this is nationally and internationally. I think about all the travels I've done and how much Hollywood and you know, the things that we watch,
the impact that it has for sure.
Anyways, so yes.
So definitely reclaiming and saying like, I love it and we can love something and critique it. And, you know, and sometimes we just need to just, have fun around it and still be critical. And anyway, so that's.
People look out for, tell me the title again. Feminista.
La Feminista Chismosa.
Oh, I love it. Yes.
And shout out to all those who, Salisa, who I brainstormed with her and she was really helpful.
Super powerful.
But I think that actually gives us a segue into what we want to talk about today, because speaking of pop culture, so I think it's really interesting. People, different like kinds of TV shows that people like to watch, right?
Yeah.
And I think a big genre is true crime stories, right? People always talk about like, they enjoy which is weird to me because I can't stand true crime because it gives me so much anxiety.
What's like a true crime? That'd be like Numbers and like Sherlock. Like I think all these shows I like to watch.
But Sherlock is still fictional, right?
Yeah.
True crime is like
it's
these like
it actually happened.
Yes. Like,
oh man, that's
like
so
these documentaries about women who were killed and like, and that just that does not help me.
Oh, like that Hillsong one I watched. I told you about.
So I don't like true crime, but I do love me a good cult documentary.
Yeah, that's true. You've admitted that before.
I think that's different than true crime. I think true crime is about like bloody murder and usually misogynistic and, you know, like all kinds of crazy shit. Yeah. And cult movies, cults or documentaries about cults or documentaries about like con men.
Yeah.
I really enjoy because often you see this rich white man get his like comeuppance.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're like, oh yes, they finally get the shit that they deserve for being assholes and being, you know, con men or being cult leaders. Yeah, for sure. Those kind of movies, those kind of documentaries fascinate me.
Or men with white privilege, basically. They could have like, you know, they could have that colored privilege in their community.
Or class privilege. Right. Yeah. Because there's so I've gone down the rabbit hole of all the cult documentaries.
Okay, will you tell me
like
what they are?
So Hillsong is definitely one of them, and there's different documentaries about the Hillsong cult.
Sure.
I think there's at least 2 or 3. I've seen 2 of them for sure. Wow. Yeah. Then there's Luz del Mundo, which is a cult, and these are all Christian-based cults, by the way.
Oh yes.
Like, let's be clear, it's not like they were talking about some weird, you know, shit. So Christian,
and that's your particular interest.
Well,
too.
So there's
that's my particular interest.
There's also Nexium. So Nexium is have you heard that one?
I've heard of it, yes.
So that one's not necessarily Christian based, but it's definitely like alternative spirituality.
I heard about
New Age kind of stuff.
So many people invited me into it. I had to look it up.
Did you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, a lot of things like that, actually. I mean, that's why I looked up the Hillsong documentary,
yeah,
too. I mean,
and we can talk about like, and then what was the other one? So Hillsong. Oh, and then recently I watched The Duggars. Yes. Right. So.
And that was like a conservative Christian born again.
It was, I forgot the name of it. It was some, again, these are all Christian based in that they create their own churches, right? Yeah. And some of them end up being like mega churches, like Hillsong. Yeah. I think the Duggars was not necessarily like a mega church, but it was very much Christian based. Yeah. That then take it to like, it's like fundamentalism.
Yes,
right?
Yes. But I like that delineating between, it's not like an Islamic cult or a Judeo cult or even like a Hindu or Buddhist. Like it's particularly the lineage of Christianity, right? Like,
and I think why Christianity lends itself to cult-like behavior is because of the whiteness. Or at least its ties to white supremacy, because truthfully, we can separate Christian doctrine, as in the story of Jesus and all of that stuff. At least in my practice of spirituality, I've separated Jesus from Christianity, right? Like per se. Yeah. It's a much more nuanced conversation.
I love it. Because we're basically blaming Constantine or something like that. We're going back to the originals, the Roman guy who made Christianity everywhere.
I remember in Catholic school, we would learn about Christianity different from Catholicism in terms of how it broke off from like Protestantism. Yeah. They didn't want to follow the Roman Catholic Church. Yes. So all of this. So that's, that was the extent of my like studying of it when I was in Catholic school. I mean, I remember charts of like the Roman Catholic, and then you would see all the different sects of of Christian,
did it
Protestant.
Take you to the Orthodox Church at all? Did it go
I
that way?
don't know. I can't remember. I just remember like where did like Protestants and like where did they broke away, and why did they break away, and then how they became whatever, and
actually, I mean, I think it's pretty good history. I don't think actually like Catholic evangelicals get that history until
they, at least I won't say across the board, but I clearly remember a priest teacher of mine saying that Mormonism is a cult. Oh. So I think there was this idea, just like you growing up Christian, and we're saying like Catholicism was like bad, right? I think similarly we said, these other practices of Christianity are not the real thing because they don't follow the Roman Catholic Church. Anyway, so cult documentaries, and I was telling you the other day that I was watching this one on the Duggars. So the Duggars are the 19 Kids and Counting. And I think
it's present, right? It's happening now.
Well, yeah, in the last few years, I don't know if it's the oldest brother or one of the oldest brothers got accused of sexual molestation by other women, but also from his sisters, like two of his own sisters. Yeah. And so there was this kind of story out there, and so I watched it, and in watching it, anytime I watch a documentary about Christian cults, it makes me think of you.
I want to put a qualifier here that I can't watch these that much. I think because it is a little too close to home, different, and it helps sometimes. But particularly watching it, I read a lot of these, actually, a little bit more, because then I can like fast forward to the parts that I don't want to see hear. But I appreciate you in my life. And the people who have been in my life to name some of these,
and we can
things.
Like debrief and be like, I was
and I love talking about this from a philosophical perspective as well as like a personal one. So I am grateful for this conversation, because I think, as you all see, we expand this conversation to include so much.
I mean, anytime I watch cult documentaries, there's themes. Okay. Yeah. The themes are capitalism, right? Oftentimes so much of a church's intentions or goals are so wrapped up in money and capitalism. So I think this is where we can't separate, white supremacy from capitalism and Christianity, right?
And commodifying into people's bodies to sell in many different ways.
Faith, spirituality, their they would even because there's always this talk about the afterlife, and I don't know, there's just and so there's that, right? So there's this theme of capitalism, there's a theme of white men, or men, and sexual violence.
Men in association with whiteness, yes, and sexual violence,
I think those are always it follows this very similar pattern, right? This white man emerges and creates this church. He gains all of these followers, makes millions and millions of dollars, and then turns out he's been, a sexual predator the entire time.
Comes up in power somehow. It could be money, but there's other ones where it's like, I'm thinking about that movie Women Talking, which I watched part of but not all of, but like just like how power is gained by using those strategies, right?
Yeah. And so it just, I think I get curious about watching them because I'm curious of how, and we talked about this the other day. Like, how do people get sucked into cults? And I don't want to victim blame, right? But I think as I've been Hillsong and Luz del Mundo really kind of shone a light
at the very beginning
on something.
I remember I love it when they're like, it was just so powerful. Like there was all this music and there was all this, like, there was so
diversity,
many people, so much diversity, right? But not on the
right, diversity in the congregation, right?
And I felt like that person was speaking directly to me, right? Like,
or I was having such a hard time in my life, and this was a place of refuge,
and
right?
This is where I was like, oh, this sounds like trafficking, Which was such a good...
Say that again.
Just a big realization for me. Like, I think I've already known that, but to say it like out loud in such a strong way, like, oh, that's how traffickers work. They, again, usually someone of male privilege, usually in their association with whiteness, will seek out, someone who is having a hard time, doesn't fit in, is marginalized, is vulnerable, and that's what they do. I think from within Christianity, or in the places I can imagine, the language I heard growing up, and I've seen these documentaries, it's like we're seeking like the poor and the suffering. Like we are, it's
well, it's the white savior mentality. Right? It's the I have the key to true salvation, freedom, eternal life, right? Like I have the key, and all you have to do is A, B, and C, and you will get this thing, right? You will have salvation. So it's the like, I'm here to save you. I'm doing this for your own good.
God spoke to me.
Oh.
I have divine authority. God said I should, bring you in.
But not just that. If you don't, right? Because that's the binary idea, right? It's not just like, if you do this, you'll get, heaven on earth or whatever. It's, but if you don't do this, you will suffer. For the rest. And I think, like you said, because trafficking is, like you said, it preys on those who are most vulnerable. And those who are most vulnerable are experiencing suffering. So they want a way out of that suffering. And then if you say it could be worse. Like how many of us have experienced mental health crises like I did last summer? I would have fucking done anything to not feel like that. Right? So,
there's no come to Jesus moment. I think there was a come to yourself. And so, this is
Yes, it was definitely a come to myself. So I'm always curious when I watch this, like, who gets sucked in, and I think that there's a vulnerability. Who's vulnerable, right? And you see a lot of them are, yes, of course, because they're so white centered, so a lot of them are going to be white people. But in Hillsong and in Luz del Mundo, they were primarily people of color, who again are already kind of, and poor people. They were, I think it was the Hillsong documentary where they talked about how people couldn't afford rents, but they would give their tithing.
Totally.
They would, and I think in the Duggars one too, that tithing had to be 10% of your, like, across. I was like, what the fuck?
I'm just thinking, I want to totally, like, aside here, I'm thinking of my abuelos a lot right now, and I'm thinking, because they never, I would witness to them, I would try to convert them from Catholicism to Christianity. I would do a bunch of things, and I've we've reconciled that in our lives. But when it came to 10%, they were like, you give that to your family first. Like they were so strong.
Your grandparents.
Mm-hmm, about in response to maybe growing up in a world where, I don't know, but I just remember hearing very like clearly from them, and I love this about them, like family comes first, and as opposed to within Protestantism or evangelical Christianity. And then when I grew up, it was
church first.
Your church first, right? Family is second. Family is a part of the church,
So, like I was telling you, when I was watching the Duggars one particularly, because now I've seen them all, so I like have
How
this
long is it?
culmination.
Just so I know.
It's a few episodes, I think, like 2 or 3 episodes.
Okay.
And that these tactics of saying church first, not family, or purity culture, and then sexual violence is not, I told you this, right, is not a product of these things. It's the goal.
It's intentional.
Luz del Mundo was the same way. So Luz del Mundo was 3 generations of men who were supposedly prophets, and and all of them were, sexual predators. And again, it was, and because so much of the rhetoric around womanhood was modesty and submissiveness and purity culture, right? All of this stuff. And so, and then the same thing is happening. I can't but conclude that it is no longer like, oh, sexual violence is a product of cults. No, sexual violence is the goal.
So this is so interesting. It makes me think of, they're the people of power in these cult-like spaces, and will say like, oh, if you don't do this, you will be punished. And they are the punisher, kind of.
Oh, yes.
Right? That's it. And that could be both for like money, right? Like any kind of like power, but also their sexual autonomy, right? Like if you don't cover everything, or it's not even, sometimes they're not covering, it's just way of being, or if it's whatever, then they are the punisher, and it's also like their world is built upon it. It's built upon this system. So I was thinking like the ideal has been like to be free of all these things, to have all these perfect people, but actually people in power stay in power because of like no one is ideal, right? No one is perfect.
Well, I mean, yes. So let me go with that, and then I have 2 other points. But no one is perfect, which actually we're going to be doing a workshop later today.
I know.
Talking about La Virgen, and I always talk about it in that way, how she becomes, the Virgin Mother, which creates this like attainable idea of perfection, right? We somehow have to have kids and be a virgin, like which is, traditionally, yes, we know science and technology and all that stuff is different now, but there's this idea of, at least within Catholicism and Christianity, you somehow have to be virginous and have children, and that's that's your sole goal, which I think gets to my other point about victim blaming. Right. But it's so much. So it's not just like, if you don't do this, I will punish you. But if you don't do this and you suffer consequences, you only have yourself to blame.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So if you're a virgin but have children, it's like your fault. Like
if you didn't cover up, and a man, because in that Duggars one, the church was very clear that men are just sexual beings, and it's your responsibility to cover up so that they don't get tempted. So that if they get tempted to do something, it's your fault. Again, how is that not setting the stage for sexual violence? And how is that not done with the purposeful intention of sexual assault? Like, these men in power are creating the rules so that when they then do these things, they're like, well, we told you.
And I think that comes back to if you're not perfect, in this case, like a woman virginal, in this case virgin means you don't want to have sex, you never had sex,
no sexuality, no sexual desire.
Even though I think the word virgin means like self-autonomous, we'll go back to that definition at some other time. But like, if you don't do those things, then you are basically you go from subject, if you ever were a subject in a system like that, a patriarchal, system, to an object, and completely. So, and that's what I think mentally allows, and I mean,
so it makes me think when people talk about race as a social construct, and the idea that race was a concept created in order to justify indigenous genocide and African slavery.
Yeah.
So too was purity culture created in order to justify sexual violence.
Yes.
That's a whole dissertation there.
Yes, that is it. Oh my God, yes.
So I wanted to mention the other documentary I watched was about FLDM, so the fundamental Mormon Church.
Yes.
Right? I think it was what is it? Church of Latter-day Saints.
Yes.
Right? And so it's the fundamental Church of Latter-day Saints.
I didn't watch that. I do listen to the Book of Mormon quite often, so I hope I have a good sense of it. Oh yeah.
I've never but so that was another documentary that was really interesting, coming from Mormonism, and
the fundamental ones. So
the
like
fundamental.
The ones that are really aggressive.
And so that one was a case of the leader of the fundamentalist church had a commune, and he had all these young women, and he would, trigger warning.
Oh yeah.
Mention of sexual assaults, blatant but descriptive.
Yeah.
He had like a room where he would perform, like, and that it was somehow part of this ritual, like, and that it was God.
Yes,
this was God's will,
because he was God's divine authority. He was creating these future laborers for the Mormon church, and he was creating probably like planets in heaven or something like that. I don't know.
And then the Duggars, the whole idea was that God said that you should have many kids so that you can. It's kind of like they wanted to take over by numbers, right? And then they can save more people if they have more kids. Like, it was the weirdest stuff.
And within both of those, belief systems are that women's bodies are meant to birth children, and that's only what women's bodies are meant to do, or bodies with uteruses. But dang, Renee, that is so. Where I love and want to take this conversation a little, which is these are like extremes that we're talking about. And sometimes I think these extremes can be used to justify normalizing like patriarchy, sexual violence in many other ways. Example, when I watched Big Love, right? Which kind of showcases a normal family versus a fundamentalist Mormon family. And I wonder, this is also within like maybe the Duggars or other cases, when we hear about these families that lock away their wives, or or embezzle tons of money, or, all these things, like big popularity. It somehow makes it, those same people with those same belief systems that do a normal life, like can separate themselves from the, like,
totally.
Like,
we're
like
not
people
those
who vote for
kinds of Christians.
People, like, who vote for Trump, like the neighbors that we have, they're not those kinds of Christians, or those kind of, whatever. We can stick with Christianity because it feels more comfortable and known. But like, I
get what you're saying.
We're the good ones, or I've had neighbors say like, "Oh, we're the Christians that love gay people. We just don't want them to get married." Like, we're not haters like that. And then somehow it seems a lot better.
They're able to distance themselves from those atrocities, right?
But it's within the same worldview and paradigm, and this worldview and paradigm that, uses people's bodies, celebrates and lifts up people of whiteness and maleness and wealth. It's a part of the U.S. culture, like.
It makes me think the gun issue. When people talk about, it's not guns, it's not it's not the guns, it's the people with the guns, right?
Yeah.
So we don't need to get rid of guns. We just need to like, deal with the people who get the gun.
Yes.
They don't even want to do that. But there's this notion like, what, good guy with a gun, bad guy with a gun, right? It's not, guns are not the issue. So they're saying Christianity, Christian doctrine is not the issue. These one-off isolated incidents people are the issue, not the actual doctrine itself. And I think what we're saying is, at the very least, we need to look at where the doctrine creates problematic people, right? It's not like people are just born cult leaders. It's like Christianity in the form that it's taken within the United States actually kind of creates the environment for cult leaders to emerge.
It's like naming rape culture, right? It's like naming, and I don't know how we're trying to name this as cult culture or something like that. Like it's but it feels very similar to men saying like, I'm not a rapist,
I'm one of the good ones, I'm a good guy. It's like
or one of like the wealthy, like I'm one of the good ones, like, I'm Bill Gates.
I'm a good
I give
billionaire.
back to when it's really a systemic issue and we're actually asking it for it to be addressed. And so I think what our conversation the other day went to was, how do we live in a world like that? So how do we, like, on a daily, like, interfacing with Instagram, if you're younger, Twitter, or if you're Renee,
or TikTok, right?
Yeah, right. Like, TikTok. That's what I meant to say.
Like,
anyways,
I don't know. There's all these new ones.
There's a lot of cult culture, basically.
There's a lot of cult culture, and I think you and I can speak directly to, the communities that we're in. If we look at like those who practice alternative spirituality, our brujas, our curanderas, our spiritualists, right? And because anyone who knows us, we love some astrology, we love all that.
I know.
And we have, I think we've kind of said this before, but we've been witness to, because we have experienced so much trauma and cult culture, and we're able to recognize it so easily that when we see it being used even in these other spaces that are supposed to be the alternative, it's like, so many people have been burned by Christianity, and so they're like, fuck this, I want something else, and so they find alternative spirituality, but then they actually just end up reimagining that same relational dynamic, right? Because the relational dynamic in Christianity is, I am the follower. This divine person is
I
the
offer
leader.
you safety in exchange for your freedom, like, right?
Yeah, and because we're so trained, indoctrinated, dare I say, to look for that person, look for that, like, where's the priest at? Where's the somebody who is going to save me and help me, get out of this suffering? And so they'll
seek that out again.
They'll seek that out. And then, of course, there's those who, whether consciously or unconsciously, will take advantage of that vulnerability, or even in their own attempts at being spiritual leaders outside of a Christian paradigm, will still bring that dynamic, right? That, like, and so both people in search of it and people who are practicing, right, and practicing leaders can sometimes emulate those cult-like dynamics outside of, in our attempts to escape from Christianity. I mean,
it's so hard. I keep on saying they, but we do it all the time. This is like, we are all kind of entrenched in this, like, our whole life.
Well, anytime we romanticize somebody, right? Where we're like, oh my God, I love this person so much, and they can do no wrong. And then shit comes out.
It's so much easier to see it from the outside, too.
You feel like, so heartbroken.
See your amiga, and she's going to date someone who's just the same as the last guy. And you're like,
and you don't want to be like,
don't do it. Don't do it.
Yes, that's exactly. We are in this abusive, like, cycle, right? Where we're like, oh, that guy was an asshole. I met this new guy. He's so amazing. And then he turns out to be abusive. 7, you're like, oh, yeah. That is such a good analogy. That's a perfect analogy.
But the thing is, I'm recognizing in that analogy that, again, the goal isn't to find like the perfect person, right? The goal is to find someone who's willing to acknowledge and work on things and to even be kind of called in about it, right? So it's like even these influencers and people, it's not like they're not like, we're not like, oh, you're gone.
Yeah.
You're going to hell or something, basically. Or like,
right.
We're more like, oh, when it's a relationship that we want to build and we want to call people into that,
I think it has me thinking of Sylvia, and she talks a lot about like, you don't want to
Sylvia Poreo.
You don't want to hand over your inner child, right? And so sometimes it's not even about calling them in or calling them out, because I don't think we're those people. We don't do that. Like, I don't think we have time for that.
It's true.
Time or energy. But I do think we can to each other remind each other of like, oh, they're humans.
Yeah.
They're not going to, we don't have to agree with them on every single thing. And we can see the red flags maybe that don't feel comfortable. And then we can consciously decide how we want to engage or not engage, and then, and so then we get to, I think that there's people who can do that, who can do the calling out, or who can be like, hey, maybe you should be a little aware of
We're more like the people that people come to. They're like, what do you think about this person? We're like, well, let me tell you.
And I think we're very diplomatic about it. We're like, well,
are you part of our,
yeah, but I think, I think, or the way I've always said it is like, look, I think, I think people are human and they can be what they want to be. Here's my red flags.
Yeah.
And those are my red flags because of A, B, and C. You decide if those are red flags for you, and you decide if that's, how based on that, right? Because other people have told us things too, and we're like, that's not, you know what I mean? Like, and so we get to feel empowered to say,
yeah, this is my experience.
I hear what you're saying, but so I think it's just about like, I think it's just feeling empowered to make choices to see people in their full humanity, which I think you're getting at is like, how do we, if we know that it's very easily to become part of a cult, it's very easily for some people in positions of power to become cult leaders because they know how to take advantage of vulnerable people, then how do we avoid being sucked into cults? And I think it's just,
how do we not give away our little girl? How do we keep her, right? Like,
because I think
after so many years of indoctrination to different varying levels, and this is like, there's extremes, like maybe mine is more extreme than yours, which thank you for that. Like, but how do we say, no, mija, like, let's come back. I got you. And,
I think I'm always trying to be like, how do I make sure that I'm not romanticizing somebody to the point where then I can get sucked into that follower behavior. Conversely, because we have a platform and we have people who love us, to always just be really fucking transparent of like, look, this is who we are. We are not perfect. Do not romanticize us, right? Like,
I think we just are that way. Well, I assume, like, we just, we're, what did you, I was Elisa again. Thank you again, comadre. What did she call us? Like, so beautifully imperfect.
Imperfectly, right? Perfectly imperfect or something like that. And I'm like, which at first you're kind of like, huh? But then, and I think that's, and it's, again, it's not, I don't know, it's so hard because I can imagine how easily it can be when you get all of this attention and, people saying, things, and it can get real easy to be like, oh, well, I'm gonna, stand on this. But like Spider-Man said, or no, Uncle Ben says to Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. Sorry, y'all, I've been on a Spider-Man kick because my kids have watched every Spider in the last like month. I don't know why, but they've been watching all the Spider-Man. So
I love it. Actually, I saw a meme. Someone was saying like, "Oh, if you're going to date men," and I was like, "What is this? You need to know about Marvel and Lord of the Rings,
God,
or something, and you have to choose." And I was like, "I think this is like getting to know Renee."
And it's funny because I don't know if I would have ever gotten into it on my own
with children. Yeah,
with children, and then because Tommy was more of that kind of person, and so he kind of. But I mean, and I enjoy it. I don't think it would have been something I would have came to on my own, but.
I want to speak to one more thing, which I think we tend to tell our friends too. I feel like it's the opposite of the doctoral question. Should I get a doctorate? And we're like, well, it's abusive. Maybe it's all this power. You should do it. When people are saying like, should I do this? And it's like, well, I think by not assimilating in some way to cult culture, life is more difficult. Like money doesn't.
Ignorance is bliss.
Come in. People don't like us the same.
Yeah.
And we're okay with that. And yeah, I think I do want to recognize when, and this is the same thing for like any kind of, oh, you want to read that book? I loved that book, but suddenly I feel like it's a never-ending story or some other like movie where you're like, this is gonna change your life, and
yeah.
And it will be for the better, but it will not be easy. Like this is not the is this like the red and blue pill? Are we totally talking about this right now?
No. Yeah. So I remember when I first went to grad school in Chicano studies and reading Gloria Anzaldúa, Ana Castillo, and all their critiques of Catholic doctrine, and particularly the narratives around La Virgen, and the Catholic Church's hand in colonialism. And I mean, again, for somebody who went to 12 years of Catholic school and actually had a good experience,
you did.
There was things I could have done without.
I should have gone to her.
But school. I think I might have experienced those anywhere, right? Because rape culture is rape culture is rape culture. Yeah. But anyway, so I didn't have this negative relationship with Catholicism until I was like learning about all this shit, and I was like, I remember there was this moment of like, what does this mean about my faith? What does this mean about these things that I've been told and have believed my whole life, and how do I make sense of that? And I think there was a part of me that at some point I was like, well, I can't support this, right? And so I had to reject it. And so there was a long time where I was like, there was just this internal battle. Until I think I read another Anzaldúa where she taught, and Castillo, where they talk very specifically about the non-binary-ism of it all, right? That we get to take what feels good and leave what doesn't. We get to create something new. There's this very specific language around, Anzaldúa calls it the borderlands, right? And we embody this borderland, and we get to kind of go between, and that made sense to me. And so then I was but this took years of me coming to this different place with where I could practice certain Catholic rituals without condoning the Catholic Church, which is why I say I can separate Jesus' doctrine from the stories of Jesus, right? So my kids know Jesus, but they don't know the 10 Commandments, right? Like they don't know, right? Like these other things, right? Because, anyway. And so I think, but it's like you said, it's hard because it's like the world you knew just was imploded. Yeah. And now you have to like, figure out how you're going to move forward. And then like we always come back to when we have kids, what are we passing on to them? What are we giving to them? Like what understanding of spirituality are we giving to them, and given our own trauma and given our awareness of cults, and cults I think can also be, I'm going to say this, not just spirituality but politics, right? Politics can be, I think Trump is definitely a cult. I think
money marketing schemes.
Totally, right? I think
Because it's a cult culture. Oh,
new age, like yoga, white yogis. Oh, talk about cults.
I want to say, as you're talking about Chicana feminists, I wanted to give gratitude because I think before I met them, I
love that you're like, before I met them. Not before I read. Before I met Ana Castillo and Cherry Moraga. Yes.
I did mean to read, but yes, I guess before I met them. But, like, my world had fallen apart. Like, my white, structured, male-dominated world was like, I don't know what to do with this, right? I was thinking about becoming like my last foray was maybe becoming an Episcopal priest and working on some like feminist activist things. And it was the Chicana feminists that brought me home, like,
ooh.
And so I'm so grateful. And they reminded me about basically, this is like another pop culture, like Black Panther moment, like, show them who you are. Like, I felt like very much like clearly, like, this is who you are. Like, it's in you, And so it's for them that I say, that being brown and being like having a vulva, like, save me, like, because there was a place to go, a family to be a part of,
I think I'm thinking, how you talked about your grandparents and they had it sounds like they had such solid grounding. That obviously your evangelicism did not convert them, right? Because they were so grounded and firmly understood where they were at. And where was I going with this? I'm thinking, it just has me thinking like, okay, so ancestors. It has me thinking of ancestors. And, there's often this talk, and I think in one of our last episodes, the one where we talked about you getting hurt, and there's so Christian doctrine gets weaponized.
Yeah.
Right? Jesus gets weaponized. La Virgen gets weaponized, right? Them in and of themselves are not necessarily the problem. It's the ways in which they get weaponized by white men.
Agreed.
And I think we have to be careful of sometimes the way our ancestors can get weaponized against us. Ooh. In a similar way, right? Like, we have to appease the ancestors. Ooh, we have to
take it there, Renee.
I mean,
take it there.
I think it's something that I'm working through. I think it's just, I don't want to believe that we said this in our last episode. I don't want to believe that our ancestors are waiting to punish us if we don't do the things that they want us to do. I just don't think that that's the way that it works. I think that that's a regurgitation of sinful Christian ideology, right? Like, to say, well, if you don't follow these rules, you're going to get punished.
I'm aware of like this. That sounds just so awful.
Well, I think
thinking about the afterlife and
when you
talk about the ancestors being there, like I'm thinking of Coco for some reason. And Mama emailed us.
I'm thinking of you when you said you got hurt, and you're like, oh, is this the ancestors trying to tell me?
Totally.
And I'm like, I don't think the ancestors are going to make you break your leg in order to learn a lesson. Like, I just don't think it works. That's what I mean.
Right. Yeah.
Like, this idea of, and anyway, so I think that.
But that's
just the same way we don't want to,
like this punitive, right?
Punitive.
Yeah.
Just the same way we don't want to idolatrize. Is that a word?
Like, make idols.
Make idols of these Christian gods.
Yeah.
We also, our ancestors are also humans.
Yeah.
Or they were humans, right? Or they have some form of humanity. And so I don't, which is why we're always very clear when we call in the ancestors to call in our well ancestors, right? Those who have our best intentions at heart, those who have done some healing work in this life or beyond, right? Like, we're not calling, because there's probably ancestors who are doing crazy shit. Like, who knows? We don't know. Or they did crazy shit in their lives. I mean, you can't be mestiza and not have some problematic ancestors, right? But those are not the ancestors we're calling in.
Good call. Yeah, no,
those are not the ones that we're dealing with here. But I think it's just to say we need to be careful.
Like, we're not calling in hauntings.
Right. I think we need to be careful about not, again, reimagining that relational dynamic that we had to Christian doctrine to any kind of other practices of spirituality, right? So, I don't know. I think that's just my thing of like, I think we, or even when people talk about God as, oh, God punished the earth or blah blah blah.
Yeah.
I don't see God punitive. Like, I just don't. My God is not punitive. My ancestors are not punitive, right? I don't get down with that in any way, shape, or form.
I mean,
I think humanity fucking sucks.
Yeah.
I think humans are punitive and humans suck.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's what we talked about, like that same pastor, priest, person who says, like, if you don't do this, you'll be punished. Like, they're the ones who are the greedy, and the bullies.
Yeah.
They're the ones doing the punishing, like, it's them, not.
And I think, so positive, what do we positively, when we talk about ancestors and having altars to ancestors, right?
Yeah.
And, even when we're like making offerings to ancestors, it's not coming from a place of fear.
Yeah.
It cannot. That's, I think, the big difference, right? Christianity is like, oh, we're giving tithing because if we don't, something might happen to us.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than saying, I'm going to have this altar to my ancestors from a place of love.
Yeah.
From a place of, I have my dad up there because to me, that's a way of keeping his spirit, not necessarily alive, but his spirit connecting to his spirit.
Yeah.
Right? We want to maintain those connections. And so we're creating these altars from a place of love, not from a place of fear and guilt.
I think there's so much where to go
with
this.
But how do we unpack this?
I think we're in the process, and I think we're going to come back to this conversation. It makes me think of La Virgin of Guadalupe, like, and how much of a symbol she means of, like, basically that too, but people can take that also. We really want to, I think, lean into a place of, like, we're, like, this is the language I'm trying to use with Jaguar too. You're good. You're a good kid. We're a good, like, we're whole. Good. We are innately, like, whole and magical, and then to see the world from that place, and the people who we love, and much more. I know I was thinking about American Gods, that Neil Gaiman book and television show, but that's another episode too.
Well, I think I want to make clear too that all of this we're still unpacking, right? Yeah. We're still working through, so a lot of stuff we said is just us thinking out loud. It's just us trying to figure out, where do we stand on this? I still question myself. Am I following a cult? Am I perpetuating cult-like behavior? And it's just kind of being aware of that and working through all these things, which I think is part of healing and part of the lifelong journey. And then because we're invested in giving our kids something, so we want to give them the best tools possible to be able to not get, duped and not get sucked into things that end up being harmful, so I think it's, we're still working through it ourselves. We're just trying to share, I think, where we're coming from and what our observations have been based on our life experiences and based on what we also our expertise.
I am so grateful for you, amiga, because and I think we do this for each other. There's moments we'll come to each other and ask this question, and it's basically a question about, am I in cult mindset? How can I get free? And I think we help each other, and this is where I think the podcast is birthed from. Yeah. And I guess I'm also hoping that you all have someone that you can talk to too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is the podcast has been so healing in that, because anytime we have a conversation, we're like, oh, we gotta
put them podcast.
But I think
next topic, perimenopause.
Season 6.
I was thinking how when they said HRT, I was like, you mean critical race theory? And it was no,
hormonal replacement theory. Oh yeah, season 6 I think is gonna be super fun.
So thank you so much for joining this in our conversation. Yeah. Is there anything else?
I think, this is the end of season 5. I think I don't know. I don't know when we started if we thought that we'd be here.
Wow.
But this season in particularly felt really nice. I think it was getting back to basics, back to our core, and also utilizing the notoriety that we had to bring on guests who just like
community just, you know, came.
They were like, and it was so easy to get guests this time around and keep it real simple and keep it real basic and just it be, you know, having conversations and that felt really nice. And so
if you all want to invite us on your podcast, we'd love to be interviewed too.
Yes, and
it's kind of fun.
And let's see what season 6 will bring us.
So exciting! I'm excited. Thank you.
All right. Mwah. Thanks. Bye. Intro and outro song is called Foreign Fog by The Corner House, a band that features our dear friend, the Anelia Arechiga.